Until recently, I lived with my parents in a private house near the city. They had always had a strict temper and a difficult character, so we never had guests at our house. The only one of my friends they could get along with at least a little was Alex. I'd known him since first grade, and he was probably the only one I could trust in a difficult situation. Unlike my parents, who found it easier to scold me for my mistakes than to teach me not to make them, Alex was always ready to help and give advice. He had much more worldly experience than I did. He grew up without a father, had been working since he was 14, and even had time to go out with girls. I, of course, envied him, but not with malice. Rather, I was happy for his success on all fronts. One thing he was unlucky about: his mother was an alcoholic. She drank half of the alimony, and the other half was used to buy Alex food. But still, he had something I didn't have as a kid: freedom. A year after he came of age, his mother died, so Alex got the apartment, and a week ago he came to visit me. Toward evening, my parents went to the theater, so we had the house to ourselves for the next 3 hours. We didn't even think about any parties because we knew how that would turn out. There was no point in having them at Alex's apartment. Despite my 19 years of age, my father was strongly opposed to my son sleeping somewhere outside the house. So my friend's idea to buy me an inexpensive apartment on the outskirts of the city was taken very positively by me. My parents were not stingy with pocket money, and I knew how to save money and put most of it away until better times. "I can hardly buy a decent apartment with it," I said. "You can." Alex smiled. "Not only a decent one, but a new one." "In new buildings?" "That's funny." My voice sounded frustrated. "I meant it," Alex said firmly. "I've already got it all figured out. Our neighbor did it recently, and now he's living and enjoying it. Your money will be enough for an apartment in an old 5-story building on the outskirts. It was built about 40 years ago. Builders poorly leveled the foundation, and along the wall formed a crack, and mold, and heating went bad. The house was recognized as an emergency and is being prepared for demolition, and the tenants will live in new buildings." "Are you suggesting that I live in a shithole that could collapse on my head at any moment?" I asked unhappily. "Come on, stop it," Alex answered. "You have less than a month to live there. It won't collapse in time, but they'll relocate you 100%. You get a free 1-bedroom apartment in new buildings. How's that for motivation?" So I told him I'd think about it and give my decision tomorrow afternoon. It was necessary to discuss everything with my parents and morally prepare for the purchase in case of their consent. The conversation was long, and I gave a lot of arguments for the purchase, and several times explained the plan. After a decent amount of time, my mother still supported my idea, and then my father, although he rather supported her, so that I finally got rid of them. But I didn't care. I was happy. So the next day, I went to Alex's house. He showed me the classified ads he'd found online the other day. They were asking a little less than the amount I had saved up. The seller turned out to be an adequate young guy, a little older than us, Alex. The apartment was inherited from his grandmother, whom he did not know, so he had no warm feelings for the housing, and put it up for sale a day after the inheritance. The apartment was on the 4th floor. The iron door stood out against the ragged painted walls, but behind it was not the best sight. It smelled like every cat in the neighborhood had spent their prime years here. The wallpaper was peeling off, and in some places there was a single, faintly burning bulb instead of a chandelier in the hallway. The window in the kitchen was cracked at the bottom corner, but it was summer, so surviving 2 weeks here didn't mean death by frostbite. In the big room there was an exit to the balcony, an old TV set, and a sofa, on which my grandmother had died. We immediately removed it and covered it with a sheet. We were not particularly superstitious, but we didn't really want to sit on the place where a person had once died. In the second room there was a closet, a bed, and a nightstand. "Well, we could live," Alex smiled. "How about I stay at your place?" I asked. "After all, the apartment is registered to me, which means that I will be moved in any case." "Here's the thing." Alex hesitated. "I don't live alone. Remember Alice from the parallel stream. It's clear. I'll have to live here. At least there are all the comforts. The iron door keeps me safe from the outside world. My conscience didn't allow me to spend the night at my parents' house, and I didn't want to see the look on my father's face when he saw his son's helplessness and unpreparedness for independent life." In the evening, we moved my things from my parents and Alex went home. I had only tap water for dinner, so I decided to go to the store. The 5-story building stood a little distant from the other houses. Because of that, the walk to the store took a decent amount of time. When I got back, it was dark outside, the streetlights were on. Outside my driveway, I noticed a silhouette. A little embarrassed, I decided to approach. "Who are you?" The silhouette asked it in a woman's voice. "I live here," I answered, turning away from the front door. The silhouette put out its cigarette and approached me. It was a woman of short stature, middle-aged, not badly preserved for her age, but with a smoky voice. "Lucy." She held out her hand. "Ray," I answered. "How long have you been here, Ray?" "I moved in today." "And you've been here all your life?" "Yeah, and I'm not going anywhere. Officials think it's easy to kick us out, promise us new apartments. They'll give us a bunk in a hostel at best." Lucy's talking. "But no way, I'd rather live here even if it's a crack in my apartment." "Do a lot of people live here?" I asked out of politeness. "No, just me and Mr. Boris. He used to be in the Navy, and they gave him this apartment for his length of service. Then his family died in an accident, so he's the only one left here. He lives on the 5th floor." We talked for a couple more minutes until another silhouette appeared from the darkness of the courtyard. His posture was straight, and his step was firm, but the limp on one leg and the heavy breathing made him look old. "Meet Mr. Boris, Ray." Lucy nodded toward the silhouette. The man stepped into the light. It was an older man with a gray head and mustache. I held out my hand to him, but there was no response. His eyes were troubled, and he was obviously worried about something, but I didn't inquire. "Don't open the door at night," the old man said sternly. "The door?" I asked him again. The old man did not answer and silently hurried up the stairs. Lucy and I looked at each other. There were no answers, so after a while we went home. I don't know why, but the request with the doors puzzled me a little. For the night, I locked the iron door on all revolutions and also the door leading to my room. I couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was filled with thoughts and the new place. And the old man wouldn't get out of my head. It must be madness, I thought, and calmed down. In the night, I was awakened by a rumble from the apartment above, as if something heavy was moving on the floor. Then heavy footsteps, rumbling again, and the last straw was something glassy shattering on the floor. I got out of bed and tapped the battery with my watch strap. The rumbling stopped. The rest of the night passed quietly. The morning before the institute, I met Lucy at the entrance and politely inquired about the apartment above me. She, smiling, replied that it was Mr. Boris's apartment. Well, that's certainly madness. Extreme. He's already moving things around. I thought and smiled at Lucy and went to study. The day when, as usual, after class, I stopped by Alex's, met Alice, and spent time there until the evening. I got home late. There was a silhouette standing in the streetlight outside the driveway again. "How was your day, Lucy?" I smiled at my neighbor. She did not answer, but only looked at me with a frightened look. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Ray, I don't know." Her voice shook. Stuttering with fear, she continued. "I'd just gotten home from work and I was standing here smoking, and then I looked up at my window and the light was on." She swallowed her saliva and exhaled, and then it was off. "Maybe there's someone out there, that's enough of that." I smiled. "The house is more years old than you and me together. That's why the wiring's acting up. You want me to come in and check it out?" "If you don't mind, Ray." She calmed down a little and handed me the keys. I cursed myself for that, but it was too late to back out. I had my gas can with me, which gave me a little confidence. The door to Lucy's apartment was locked. With a trembling hand, I opened the door and quickly turned on the light. There was no one in the hallway. I checked the kitchen and then the hall and bedroom. Empty again. There was no desire to go downstairs, so I made the decision to shout out the window to Lucy. She, delighted, looked up and came into the entryway. She offered to drink tea and sit at her place, but I politely declined and wandered to my room. About an hour passed. I sat at my laptop and watched a TV series. The window was fully open and I could hear everything that was going on outside, whether it was the voices of people passing by or the sounds of cars passing somewhere far away. Suddenly, I heard a scream. A woman's scream. I jumped up from my seat and looked out the window and saw no one. There was another scream. Now I realized it was coming from our house. It all came together in my head. I was shaking. My whole body felt like one big block of ice, a moment and then the screaming again. Only Lucy could have screamed, I thought. But who could have hurt her? A husband? Does she even have one? Maybe an ex-husband. And if she didn't open the door, then I froze for a second. My eyes opened so wide that they seemed about to fall out. My breathing froze. I hadn't checked the tub. The thought crashed into the crust of my brain and left its mark there. The stupor receded and I grabbed my phone and hid behind the curtain so I could see who was coming out of the entryway and, if need be, identify the culprit. At the police station, the dispatcher said a squad was on its way and would be there soon. The police car took 10 minutes to arrive. During that time, no one came out of the entryway. 3 policemen ran into the house and 1 stayed outside. I waved to him and gave him the apartment number so they could take my statement. There was a knock on the door. It was 2 operatives. They wrote down everything I told them and then invited me into Lucy's apartment. She was lying in the bathtub. A trail of blood stretched from the bathtub to the window. In the kitchen, she was probably trying to call for help or flee. No cause of death was determined at the scene. Not a single wound. Blood came out of her mouth and her fingernails were broken as if she had fought someone before she died. According to police, the door had to be forced open, which means the perpetrator had access to the apartment. The investigators' assumption was that the killer left the building through the attic and went out another door that leads toward the woods and is on the opposite side of my window. It was unbearably hard to spend the night at home alone. I called Alex and invited him to come over to my place. Alex was reluctant but arrived. Alice had spent the night at her house tonight, so there was nothing holding him up. By the way, I didn't tell the police about the senile grandfather upstairs. What's the point? They'd start questioning him and he'd move the nightstand in front of them, I thought. The night passed as it always did. At about 4 o'clock I heard a familiar rumble and a low, quiet voice, and then again a bang of something glassy against the wall and loud footsteps, as if the old man started jumping on the spot. After 5 minutes, everything went quiet, and I fell asleep. In the morning, Alex shared his impressions after the sleepover. Not only did you put me to sleep on the floor and I couldn't sleep half the night because of that, but some idiot wore me out by jumping in the middle of the night. I heard that too. I smiled. It's my upstairs neighbor, the moronic grandfather. Upstairs neighbor, so you have a psychotic grandfather living here? And you made me go to your place in the middle of the night and climb up the dark stairs? What if he killed a woman? And I shuddered. Thoughts of him going down to her place, opening the door, hiding in the bathroom, and waiting for a defenseless woman to stay home alone and take a shower after a hard day's work started popping into my head. You've had enough, I said. He's barely breathing. He's not even capable of murder. The day went by fast. There were only 2 lectures, so I got home early. Lucy's brother came to Lucy's apartment. I met him on the landing and asked him about Lucy's family. He told me that she didn't have a family and never had one. She had no luck in life. He lives in another city and only came here for his sister's funeral. I spent the rest of the day at home, watched a soap opera, went to bed early. I was in a bad mood. At night I was awakened again by a noise from upstairs. This time they jumped more often and harder, as if trying to break the floor with their feet. I managed to fall asleep. I got up very early. I couldn't get Alex's words out of my head. Was Grandpa really capable of something like that? I decided to call the police. The squad showed up an hour later. They reprimanded me for not immediately telling about all the tenants of the house, even scared me with a suspended sentence, and when I told about my grandfather and my suspicions, the investigator decided to interrogate the old man at once. I was told to go with them. They knocked on the door for a long time. Boris didn't answer. Then the investigator decided to break down the door. Behind the door was a well-kept apartment. On the wall hung portraits of Boris and his family, but the grandfather himself was nowhere to be found. The door to the bedroom was closed. The investigator knocked. Silence. Then he ordered an operative to break down that door as well. The last barrier came off the hinges, and we entered the room. Boris's pale, bald, and thin body sat in a chair in front of a huge mirror. Around him lay his gray hair, which had either been torn from his head or he had torn it out himself, and shards of something glassy. The old man's blood-smeared eyes were open. and staring at the reflection of the door in the mirror. He was looking right at us. The investigator called an ambulance. The next day, I stayed home, didn't go to the university. I called Alex, but he didn't pick up. It got lonely and creepy. I closed all the doors and windows for the night, went to bed with the lamp on, and somehow fell asleep. It was dawning. I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling, and thought. Suddenly there was a rumble from upstairs, jumping and running around the apartment. Are they jogging in the morning now? I thought. The realization of the situation came after a couple of seconds. I jumped out of bed and dialed the police number. The time dragged on for a long time. The noise died down and I heard a police car pull up to the entrance. They searched the apartment, nothing. I collected my laptop, money, and passport. The policeman agreed to stay with me until I left, so I dressed quickly. From all the horror, I even forgot where I threw my cell phone, so I had to dial it from my home phone, which I had never used until then. On the way, the investigator told me the results of my grandfather's autopsy. Turns out he'd been dead for 3 days at least. So he was killed the day he told us about the doors. I went to Alex's house and stayed with him until the evening while he was at the institute. When he got home, we decided to take 3 of our friends with us and get my remaining stuff in the apartment. The streetlights started to come on as we approached the house. It was a bad idea to walk in the evening. As we approached the house, I shifted my gaze to my windows. The lights came on for a moment and then went out. I almost fainted. How we got home, I don't remember. I only remember yelling at everyone to get back away from that house. Now I'm staying with Alex, waiting for the house to be demolished. And recently I found out that I had missed calls from my apartment's home phone. Threw the SIM card away with the cell phone. It's not my problem anymore.